Welcome, everybody. I'm Lois Sonstegard, and I am excited and delighted to have you here with me today. I'm from Minneapolis. Right now, it's full. We're anticipating a lot of snow right now, but in the summer, our summers are beautiful. What I'm going to share with you today will change your business. It comes from years of experience, but it also comes from research that I spent time doing during COVID. And there's changes that are coming that we're going to all be dealing with. You know them already. You see what's happening in the economy. So we need to get ready for that. What do you do? And how do you prepare? Your business is fragile, and you may not even know it right now. According to the U.S. labor statistics, approximately 20% of new businesses fail during the first 2 years after being opened. 45% get shuttered in the first 5 years. 65% close in the first 10 years. Only 25% of businesses make it to 15 years or more. Interestingly, even with our larger mid-sized companies, the data are not strong and promising in terms of their future survivability. We're just getting to know each other right now. I don't really know you in detail, but what I do know is you are in danger of being wiped out. Many businesses in the past thought that they were invincible. Think of Kodak. They thought they had that nailed in the market, right? And today, they're a thing of the past. And I could go on. Sears is another one of those companies. My goodness, they had a corner on the catalog business. They should have cornered the e-commerce business, and they didn't. Our businesses are more fragile than we are aware of. You may be aware of some of the pressures and challenges that you are experiencing and wondering, what does that mean for me? And yes, that does mean you are vulnerable to being very fragile. So it's not just the big people like Sears, Blockbuster, Kodak, Eastman, the list goes on. We can list many big companies, but all of us are really vulnerable and we need to prepare. So why do I say that? Pricewaterhouse tells us in their latest research of CEOs, 4,400 people that they interviewed and studied in 105 countries, 40% of the CEOs said they weren't sure they would make it for the next 10 years. So we're vulnerable. And what do we do when we're vulnerable? How do we prepare? How do we move through that so that we're one of the people who survives? That's what we're going to talk about. So statistically speaking, the odds are stacked against you. 75% of businesses aren't going to make it. What is your perspective? Is it a short-term perspective where you're just trying to make as much revenue as possible, as fast as possible to increase your valuation so you can quickly sell your company and get out of it? Or is it a long-term perspective where you really want to establish a solid base, a great profitability, net margins, strengthen the marketplace, so you really have strong value when it comes time to sell your company? So who did I design this for? Well, it's for business leaders and CEOs who want to scale, but are constrained by your resources. You may feel overwhelmed by the forces of competition. You may be challenged by supply chain in many different ways. You may feel the hand of inflation growing heavier, more onerous, and impacting your costs in a tremendous way. We're seeing more pressures in this area today. This is for businesses who want to move ahead of the challenges and become stronger, more resilient, and more optimistic about their future. This is for businesses with an open mindset. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to show you 3 ways collaboration will exponentially grow your business. These 3 things will show you what you need in order to get ahead of your competition. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm even talking about this today. So I'm a business strategist and an executive coach. I've been in business and worked in business for 30 some years. I've taken a manufacturing company from startup to selling in 22 countries. I've worked with large multinational companies. I've collaborated with US business companies in biotech, and I've headed healthcare services for women and children. You may also be interested in knowing I grew up in Japan. I lived there until I was 19 years old. So many of my perspectives are influenced by Japanese management thought and how they do things. So let me ask you, what's your number one business struggle? Your number one business struggle, is it limited cash flow? Number one, limited cash flow. Number two, inadequate team to meet your future growth. Number three, the economy. Look at the layoffs right now in the data tech industry. We have seen enormous layoffs. Last year, we saw 140,000 in the tech industry. This year already, just by the end of January and February, that number is at 93,000. We have a lot of people being laid off. What does that mean for us and for our future in our businesses? 4, is your struggle the need to access more meaningful resources? Or 5, is it something else? You're not alone. Others are struggling with the same challenges. And I think that's one of the things that is so hard when you're in business, is you feel like you're all alone. No one else has this struggle. No one else has these problems. And you'll find lots of people are struggling through the same thing. So let me ask you another question. How many of you feel 1, disconnected and alone? 2, concerned about your future ability to withstand the various challenges you face? 3, concerned that you're facing declining revenue in the coming 3 years? 4, health and personal challenges as a result of your unique business challenges. Let us know. I'm eager to know what you're feeling right now. Your concerns are real, and data supports your concerns. They asked, to what extent do you believe the following will impact your profitability in your industry in the next 10 years? They said that they were going to be impacted by changing customer demands and relationships by 56%. And another 53% said that they would be impacted by changing regulations. Here is something that is very interesting, and that is that 52% of CEOs said that they would be impacted by labor skills and shortages. So it's a dual issue of skills and shortages. Supply chain is going to continue to be an issue for 43%. Technology disruption, 49%. Transition to various energy sources, which is what we hear a great deal about, 37%. And new entries into their industry and adjacent industries, 29%. So think about that. Forrester has told us that one of the things that we're going to see moving forward in 2023 and beyond is a flattening of revenue as companies have to adapt to changing customer demands and wants. And so, again, Price Waterhouse is telling us that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to have to adapt and change because our customers are changing and they will demand it. They will go to the people who provide the resources that they need and want. So let me have you just pause for a moment and step back in time and think. Think of a time when you had a challenge. You joined in with the group and your creativity just surged. You were so excited. You were engaged. You were enthralled by the mission and vision. And you had all the resources that you needed. They were already there. I had this experience at the University of Minnesota many years ago, early in my career. I had a department that was losing money. Staff turnover was at 180%, and our patient outcomes were poor. I needed to turn that around, but we didn't have additional resources. We didn't have additional staff. We needed to turn it around with what we had. And so we did it by creating a dream for what that place could look like. We brought people alongside so they could feel and live that dream, and then began to put the pieces in place to support them. We planned for the short term. We planned for the long term because it was going to take us more than just a few months to change the problems that we had there. As we did that, the energy shifted. you could feel the excitement. You could feel the people talking about, what else can we do? How can we do this differently? How can we do this better? And it was contagious. People all around began to feel it. In that department, there were no new treatments that could really be provided. Every new medicine, surgery had already been done, and our outcomes were not good. We had a very high mortality rate. It was a cancer unit for end-stage cancer. The question is, what do you do in that environment? What do you do when you really can't change what you're doing in terms of treatment modalities? What can you change? We couldn't increase staff. We couldn't keep staff. No one was really happy. We were losing money, so no one wanted to invest money into this department. As we changed our outlook and as we put new pieces in, what happened was people began to, as they focused on the long term and began to dream about what it could be, our energy shifted, our momentum shifted, and you saw an increase in hope. When we feel hope as human beings, our immune system opens up and we're more able to accept things. And we saw people getting better. Soon we became the most popular place in the hospital to work. We had a waiting list for people. That particular unit started making money. It was no longer losing money. Without changing resources, financial resources, changing the energy, changing the perspective, changing how we work together, and involving more people who were already there but not being utilized well, we changed outcomes. That's significant. The same thing happened with the Kennedy Space Center. Do you remember the movie, The Four Figures? I love that movie because that is an incredible example of thinking, first of all, outside the box. Secondly, involving people that you normally might not involve, but have incredible contribution to make. So remember in that movie, the computers were humans, and in this particular situation at the Kennedy Space Center, it was 4 African-American women whose brains were so wired for mathematics, they could do unbelievable calculations in their head. And when they discovered that these women could do this, they called them the computers, and they were brought in to do the mathematics on things that no one else could do. At that time, it was not the place to go in terms of bringing in African Americans. We were still segregated as a country, but they came in and they worked with the team, and they were an incredible contribution. Thinking broad, thinking wide, thinking deep, involving a larger group of people around a mission, a shared mission, has an incredible impact. Let me give you another example. Remember Winston Churchill in the Battle of Dunkirk? He was standing in front of Parliament. Parliament was beginning to look at Winston Churchill as, he'll never pull this off. The odds were against them. All of the British military was in France. They were surrounded by the Germans. They were about ready to be annihilated. What would England do without their military? Chamberlain led a group in opposition to Winston Churchill. He thought that they should negotiate peace, negotiate a treaty treaty with Hitler using Mussolini to negotiate it. And they thought that if they did, perhaps Germany would not come to England and they would be safe. In the midst of that, Winston Churchill felt like he was losing ground. How could he explain going to war when he was facing the annihilation of his entire military, first of all? Secondly, people were advising the royal family to flee to Canada where they'd be safe. Who really was going to trust him? And did he have the influence to be able to shift? Late at night, one night, the king arrived at Churchill's home, and Churchill had already gone to bed, and his wife came into the bedroom and said, "Churchill, you have to wake up. The king is here." And Winston says, "The king here in my house?" And as he's saying that, the king enters the bedroom, and the usual small talk at first. And then the king shares what he's struggling with, that he has to make a decision about what he's going to do. And he says, "Winston, what are you going to do?" And Winston says, "I don't even know my own mind anymore. I am alone, nobody to talk with and share what it is that I'm thinking." And the king said, "Well, now you have me." And so he says, What should I do? And the king says, I don't know, but you're very good with people. Go ask the people. So the next day he's on his way to Parliament, and his limo stops at a traffic light, and he's waiting for that light to change. And he notices to the left of him, the tube station. And in an instant, as the light is changing, he opens the door, runs out of the limo and into the tube before the chauffeur realizes what's happening. And he gets on the subway, and people begin to gather around him. And he shares with the people his dilemma. What do I do? He asks. What do you want me to do? Do we fight, or do we make a treaty at this point? And to a person on that train, they said, we will fight. Even if they come to our back door, we will fight. And so from there, Winston went on to Parliament and made his most famous speech about fighting. He still didn't have the answer, but he was going to fight to the finish. And that changed the trajectory of the war for the UK. He went outside of the traditional framework. He went to the people on a subway to ask them for their opinion. He got depth. He wasn't listening just to the experts in Parliament who were listening to themselves talk all the time. Their information was within the same sphere. He moved outside that sphere and got fresh input and fresh ideas. And that changed the trajectory. If you've watched the movie, The Battle of Dunkirk, you've seen what he did. After that speech, ignite the fisher people in the UK to bring any ship that was greater than 30 foot in size. And it was with fisher boats that evacuated the British Army from France and saved it. Unbelievable. And that's the power of being able to think broad, think deep, think past yourself, change your mindset, see more than just what's in front of you, having a long-term perspective, not an immediate perspective. So in these stories, what really happened? In each of the situations, what happened was confidence increased. Planning shifted to the long term. It wasn't just on the immediate, how do I survive this moment, but how do I win in the long term? People became energized. People wanted to work together to make a difference. The same thing happens in our workplace. When we bring them together and we energize them, they want to solve a problem. They want to work together in a meaningful way to make a difference. And you begin to surround yourself with trusted, reliable, results-driven people. Best of all, you discover you're not alone. This is risky. You won't make it for 10 years, and you'll become part of that statistic that simply will not make it. When looking at the CEO's perspective of economic growth and how that will change and impact them, 73% of CEOs saw a decline in their economic growth. 73% saw a decline, and that you can see by the red line that's going up in 2023. Those who thought it would stay the same, only 8%. There are changes coming, and if we put our blinders on and aren't willing to look, we will be just simply a statistic. So Pricewaterhouse went on and said, okay, how confident are you about your company's prospects of revenue growth over the next 12 months? And this is what they tell us. If you look at, the earlier years, 2008, 2009, 2009, when we were having our last economic crisis, there was a decline, right, in our economic growth. And then in 2010, we saw a major rise in our economic growth. Look down the chart at 2023. They're projecting a 26% decline. Amazing, isn't it? As we look at these trends, one of the things that we begin to feel is that sense of despair. It's like we're entering a valley that, how do we get out of it? At first, think of it in COVID. My response initially was shock. Really? How long is this going to last? What does this really mean? And then you'd watch these clips of news where you saw trucks carrying out bodies that had died in the hospital, and you thought, wow, what next? What next? And then for a while you wanted to just, well, it's not going to happen to me. I'm healthy. I'm strong. We're going to make it. I have a different way of looking at things. I know I'm going to make it. And so you lived in a period of denial. And then we felt that sense of frustration of how do we get out of it? I've got to move into something different, because living in the frustration was overwhelming. It created and led into depression. And we saw a rise in depression all over our country, didn't we? We're hearing people say the same thing right now. Without having had time to fully recover from all of the things that happened with COVID, we've entered an economic downturn. At first, it's shock. No, it's not really going to happen. Is it a recession? Isn't it a recession? No, we're not going to really have a recession. That's denial, right? And then we're overwhelmed and frustrated by the things going on in our business. Can't get the supplies that we need. Our trucks are having trouble making it in terms of having the fuel that they need, getting to the places that they need. And then you see other forms of transportation having their crises as well. Supply chain is broken, and we wonder what will happen next. And there's a sense of ennui, despair that begins to enter. And we feel like we've entered this valley of despair. As we do, we have the choice of looking at what's happening, taking it apart. This is why it's happened that way. And if I'm going to come out of this valley and move up, I have to look at things differently. I have to accept what's happened. I have to then move beyond, making new choices, integrate new things into my thinking and into how I approach things. And then things begin to shift. So as you think about what you're experiencing, you may have a sense of, well, how do I get out of this? Can you get out of it? Based on what we've seen, things don't look good, but we can look at what's happened, accept it, develop new strategies, and things will actually begin to look better. Well, let me show you how. So how do you move into something in which you are better, in a better position? Interesting research that's been given to us by Nicholas Nassim Khalid. And he talks about becoming anti-fragile. So why is that important? Well, when we're fragile, you can see in that pink line, we go up, and then suddenly we begin to have stress. Things begin to impact us. And as we move down below that stress line, things begin to cost us more. Our health may fall apart. We lose in many different ways. So there's a point where we begin to break, where the stress shifts us and our trajectory turns downward. We can have a robust perspective or a more resilient perspective, which allows us to have energy. It allows us to bend, to be flexible, to see possibilities, to look beyond and outside of ourselves. When we're fragile and stressed, we become self-centered. We look at the short term. We look at what I need right now, and we don't have that longer term perspective. When we're resilient, we have a much more resilient perspective. When we're anti-fragile, we're more than resilient. We now take stress and we say, stress is good for us as long as we can channel it and use it to our benefit. Now we can become stronger. We have a bond that makes us much, much greater. We have a bond that allows us to survive almost any stress that comes at us. What we've learned from Khalid is that stress is actually useful if we can channel it, if we can absorb it and learn from it, utilize it. It's like going to the gym, right? You want to stress your body to a certain extent in order to build it up, to strengthen it, to be able to endure more, to be able to move to that next challenge that you're going to face. Same thing is true when we become anti-fragile in our businesses. We build strength, muscle, vision, resources that takes us further beyond. It's more than being resilient. When we're fragile, we feel disorder and we're damaged. We push back. We want to hide. We want to cocoon. We want to get within ourselves. When we move to being resilient, we allow ourselves to be bendable, flexible. We're not affected so much by the disorder. And then as we move into becoming more anti-fragile, we look at what are the benefits that we can bring from this disorder and utilize it, harness it. Remember Damocles and the sword that was over his head? Well, when you've got a sword over your head that could break any moment and drop on you, you are always worrying about what's happening around. You're dealing with the problems of volatility and how are you going to survive? You don't know when that sword is going to drop on you, right? And you look at wanting tranquility. Let me just go someplace where I can have peace and quiet. I don't want the clutter and the noise. So there's a desire to escape. Unfortunately, when we're in that position, we often make many mistakes, and that's not good for us. So we have the choice of moving and becoming resilient. And so you look at the phoenix that rising up out of the ashes. It can rise up and it can deal with the volatility. It can be indifferent to volatility. It just rises up again. The anti-fragile is more like the hydra. When one head is cut off, two heads grow and it becomes stronger. And another gets cut off, another two grow and grow and grow. In the face of volatility and of pressure and of forces looking at it that could destroy it, the hydra simply becomes stronger. It grows more heads. So let me ask you, are you ready to become anti-fragile?